Hi everyone. I was told by Dr. Ratnayaka that you still have a few slides to cover for animals before we can move on to ecology and the science of ecology, populations, communities, and onwards. So where you had stopped was looking at the structures and important classifications of echinoderms, or the sea star family, basically. And the most important things for you to be thinking about here are specifically, let me show you the later pointer here, a few things. The first thing is the fact that they have a central stomach, okay, and arms that use water to change the to pass nutrients through the entire body, and even have basically digestive glands or areas in which some materials will break apart. So the mouth and anus in the center, coming from essentially that beak in the center of the sea star, is where the material comes in, the food comes in. Then it is transferred into some of those digestive glands, where within each of the arms of the uh, echinoderms, where the digestion actually happens. What is very important is that essentially there's a system also of um, ampullas, or water vessels, that can move and transport water throughout the system of the body. They do not have blood, they don't have other transport of nutrients except for water that allows them to essentially contract and expand different parts of their bodies, despite having that harder exoskeleton on the outside. Okay, and the spines, the dermal gills where they breathe through, um, and of course the tubed feet which they squirt water out of in order to move on the sea floor. Another thing that's important to understand is that they have a non-centralized um, nervous system that essentially allows them to sense from all parts of the body, and each of the different arms can make decisions for itself, as opposed to a centralized brain that tells them how to move. A couple of other things that are important here um, are that the gonads, essentially the reproductive organs, are on the sides of each of the different arms, and they will be released through the skin, or through the skeleton, outwards towards the sea for fertilization and reproduction. What are the major classes within echinoderms? We've got the feather stars, okay, which essentially have some tendrils which they collect food with. You've got the sea stars, okay, Asteroidea. You've got the brittle stars, which essentially have much more mobility in each of their arms. We've got the sea urchins and sand dollars, which have a larger shell, and each of the different arms is actually encompassed within the body of a specific shell. And the sea cucumbers, which are a really fascinating group of their own. I recommend looking at some videos about the sea cucumbers, and some of their very cool defensive mechanisms, like injecting their intestines as a protective startling effect on their predators. They can regrow them, so it's not a big deal for them. The last group that is important for you to know something about are the chordates. The chordates come from the term for a notochord or a spinal cord. Okay, the spine itself only appears in organisms that have specifically a skeleton. However, some of the earliest examples, such as lancelet and Pheochus, they do not have bones, only cartilage, but the structure is organized from a central brain through a cord, which essentially transports messages throughout the body. It has a separate digestive system with an opening and an anus, in other words, a mouth and an anus, gills for breathing, hearts for pumping blood throughout the system, and transporting nutrients and oxygen throughout the body. Again, what's important here is the understanding that we have a centralized brain and a directional passage of information through a notochord. In chordates, we've got some major uh, phyla, okay, where we have um, the tunicates down at the bottom here, less important of these things in the last list, which are kind of the outside because they don't have bones, and then we start moving into the next big movement or big adaptation in that family, such as the jawless fishes. So at the beginning, we've got things like the lampreys, okay, that do not have, they suck blood, they have many teeth, but they don't have a jaw. From there, we move on to the cartilaginous fishes, such as sharks, and from there into some bones, evolution of vertebrae and bones, onwards to the jaws that essentially have a ability to consume, open up, and dismember or break apart food instead of sucking liquid food. It's a big advantage here. And then movement onto land, where it changes between from the swim bladders into lungs. So swim bladders just changed their purpose and became lungs, which allowed then the absorption of oxygen. And then come the limbs. And the two things that are very important here are the amniotic egg, okay, which helps protect the eggs and allows them to continue to reproduce on land, or even more important, essentially internalizing that amniotic egg and essentially becoming a placental organism such as the mammals. Within mammals, we have three major groups. We've got the monotremes, who are egg-laying mammals. There's only two groups within them, the platypods or platypuses and the echidnas. They are also venomous mammals, which are kind of a very bizarre group of their own. But then we have the marsupialas or the marsupials, who have essentially a very short gestation period internally, and then the baby, the fetus, moves into the pouch, um, and it reproduces there. Some other interesting things that happen in this case, of course, the name of that adaptation is vivipary, or the ability to carry live babies within your body. And a few things are interesting about marsupials. They have two uteri, they have two vaginas. Essentially, they have two nipples of different sizes for two babies of two different sizes, and they all constantly are pregnant and raising babies in their pouches at different stages. And then we end up in the well-developed placenta that can hold a baby, hold a fetus for a long period of time internally, and we end up with the placental mammals. For the self-study on primates, you can follow the slides. You have them shared with you, and you're able to follow those on your own.